And if you see most of my judgments later, the center of it is international humanitarian law.
Let's talk about settlements. I mean, and international law is a good transition point to talk about the settlements. And the threshold question is, if you read the Fourth Geneva Convention, and if you read the Hague regulations, is the inescapable, reasonable conclusion that one must come to is that all of the settlements, whether on the West Bank or in East Jerusalem, are in violation of international law?
I really don't want to talk about it. It's such a hot topic in Israel nowadays.
And as we speak, the construction continues.
Well,
Prime Minister Netanyahu just 2 weeks ago announced that he was going to be constructing 1,100 more units.
Yeah, but that's in Jerusalem. So that from the Israeli point of view, it doesn't raise those questions because Jerusalem is part of Israel. Israeli law applies there, and so that's another question.
Okay.
But the same question may come up in other places. As it is such a hot topic, I must impose on myself some rationale in the beginning of the settlement was security.
Well, and some would argue that was a pretense, right?
Some argue it was.
And in fact, while the pretense was being maintained, there was the political leaders of Israel were very openly saying, we want to put as many settlements as possible on the West Bank to make the establishment of a Palestinian state as difficult as possible.
Again, don't drag me into it. It's not so simple. I mean, different parties have different. The law that applies in the West Bank is the law as it was there before our occupation, and the additional laws that are applicable since then. So when we were there, occupying it as a belligerent occupant, it was, in addition to the old law, there was legislation by the Israeli military commander. Now that the military commander is out, I think most of it was abolished by the Palestinian Authority, and they have legislated to it. So it was not a question of Israel.
By curbing the excesses of the occupation, the court legitimized the occupation. Tom Segev, a writer for Haaretz, in a very harsh op-ed said, Barak gave the horrors of the oppression a legitimate front. Decent people can tell themselves that if Barak could live with the occupation, then so can they. His guilt is therefore greater than that of people doing the dirty work out in the field. That's an awfully tough comment, and I think an unfair one, but is there any scintilla of truth to it, do you think, at all?
Well, I know this criticism was raised by a very tiny minority of liberals, let's say.
Yeah.
Because they understood very well that the involvement of the Supreme Court, it's not just my involvement, the whole involvement of the Supreme Court. From the first day, the Attorney General then was Shamgar, who later was a judge on the Supreme Court. And,
right.
And when the first cases started to come before the Supreme Court asked the Attorney General, do we have jurisdiction in those matters? And he said, yes. I, on behalf of the State of Israel, you have full jurisdiction. We will never argue that the Supreme Court doesn't have jurisdiction. So I think it was quite clear that what the Supreme Court, through those years, and don't forget many, many years since '67, what the Supreme Court has done is to preserve the rule of law in this area. And that without the Supreme Court's existence there, the situation of the local population would be worse. Ask them, and they will tell you. The Supreme Court has done a job, good job. They could do a better job from their point of view. They would come, we would have every year from '67 until the Oslo Agreement, something like 200 or 250 cases per year. The Supreme Court, from Arabs, and also later also from Israeli settlers, who that came to the court and argued against all kind of events that occurred in their daily life. And we were trying to do justice. In some cases we failed.